and remember why they mattered, how they blessed us. So thanks for taking a moment to be doing that. Well, as we do launch into a new year, what do you really long for in 2026? What would you like this new year to be like for you? I think a lot of people would answer that in terms of maybe things that you want to accomplish, maybe something in your career or some project in your house that you've been putting off and now it's time to finally do that. Maybe it's going to visit some place that you've never been before. Others may maybe answer in terms of relationships. A relationship you want to develop, a relationship you want to improve. And of course, we would all long to see the Pirates have a winning season, right? I mean, that'd be great, But the specifics are going to vary with how we answer that question. But I venture to say that every one of us in this room would say that we would long for 2026 to be a joyful year. However we would think of what a joyful year might be like. Well, we come back to, after a hiatus during the Advent season, we come back to our series we're calling a potpourri of Paul, and we come to a letter of his, Philippians, that just drips with joy all over it. 104, I think it is, verses in Philippians, 16 different references to joy and rejoicing. And the passage I want to look at today, rejoicing, it's not super prominent in the passage itself, but it does give us a little window into who this guy Paul is and what makes him tick, what makes him a person who is able to exude such joy. And because you see, I think it's important because ultimately, if when we get to the end of this year, we say, this was a joyful year, I believe it'll have a lot less to do with what we did accomplish and all the things that happened to us, as it will have to do with the kind of people that we're becoming. Well, let's have at this portion of God's Word in Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 12. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It's true. Some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, that Christ is preached, and because of this, I rejoice. Yes, I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain, which is a line that I actually preached on Monday at funeral. Well, Philippi, there it is on a map for you. It's in the top of the map there in Greece, the region of Macedonia, northern Greece. The city, about 30 or so years before Jesus was born, became a Roman colony when they had a lot of veteran Roman soldiers that went and settled the place. If you read Acts chapter 16, you can see the story of Paul's time there. It was a pretty short time, but an impactful time. It was a time where, he actually established a church, which was the first church in the European continent, in Philippi. In the passage we're looking at here, we see a really key piece of context for the letter when Paul says, what happened to me, when he references that, and being in chains. Because what's happened to Paul is that he's in prison. Actually, most of the commentators think it wasn't an actual literal chains. It was more house arrest. They think it was the time he was detained in Rome toward the end of his life when he was there awaiting trial that eventually resulted in his execution. There are, though, a few New Testament scholars, most notably N.T. Wright, probably the most renowned New Testament scholar in the whole world today, who think, no, it's a literal prison, probably Ephesus, and that when he talks about the palace guard, that it's the governor's palace. But either way, not a very pleasant situation to be in, right? And you compound that with what he says in the next paragraph about how while he's being detained, that some fellow Christians are trashing him. They're trashing his reputation. And for some people, they'd probably rather be in jail than have their reputation trashed, that people not think well of them, right? It'd be interesting to know what was it these people were saying about Paul. But you know why we don't know? We don't know because Paul doesn't ever defend himself. He doesn't, go on Facebook or X and say, no, this is my side of the story. You're all wrong. He doesn't do any of that. Nor does he about being maligned by these people or just the fact that he's being detained. Nor does he, write a lot about how, God, why in the world are you letting this happen to me? No, instead, what Paul is looking to do is to see, God, what are you up to in what's happening to me? And with that, he's actually very encouraged because he sees that what God is up to is something that is really important to Paul himself. He says the gospel's being advanced. What's happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. And in one way that's happening is because, the guards are now hearing about Jesus. And you think about that, these guards, they didn't have cell phones, right? They couldn't go, spend their time playing games on their phones or checking their social media. I mean, what are they going to do? How are they going to pass the time? Well, probably talk to their prisoner, right? And they'd say, hey, Paul, who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing here? And Paul's a preacher. Boy, what a great opportunity, right? Asking those kind of questions. It's probably urban legend, most of the scholars say, but there was a story floating around that said that the officials were getting really frustrated because all of Paul's guards are becoming Christians. They have to swap them out before they can, so they won't become Christians. So again, probably a legend. But anyway, they're hearing about the gospel. And also, as he says, that Christians who see this, they see how Paul's doing this, and they're encouraged. They're emboldened. They're stronger witnesses for their faith because they see what Paul is doing. And so, not yet believers are hearing the gospel. Believers are being encouraged and built up. For Paul, that's a win. Those are two wins, right? Despite the fact that he's, as he says, in chains. And with these other believers that are trashing him, he says, yeah, they're trying to stir up trouble for me, but here's his bottom line about that. But what does it matter? The important thing is, in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, and there's our word, I rejoice. Well, that rejoicing is because of, what's happened. Past tense, 2025, right? The next line, though, he's looking more forward when he says, I will continue to rejoice. He's looking to the future, to the time ahead with all its unknowns, including for him the huge unknown of whether he's going to be released or executed. Right? Now, it seems at first here that he's kind of expecting that he's going to be, delivered from prison when he says, what's happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. But then as you read on, maybe not so. I eagerly expect and hope in no way I'll be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. See, he realizes he can't really know or predict the future. All he can really control is his own response to an uncertain future. And that eagerly expect is a really, it's a picturesque phrase. It's only used one other time in the New Testament. It's Romans 8:19, where it says that all creation is eagerly expecting, waiting to see the children of God revealed. It's a picture of someone standing on their toes and craning their neck, saying, oh, what's coming next? What's coming next? And what is Paul looking for what's coming next? Well, he's looking to see Christ exalted in him, whether by life or by death. Right? In other words, in that marvelous line, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And the only certainty Paul has as he's looking to the future is Christ. And that's really the only certainty that he needs. I think a lot of us, we sort of, we live a lot of our lives sort of somewhere halfway in between regrets about things that have happened in the past and anxiety about the future that we don't know, Augustine, the great church father, had a really interesting take on this. In his classic work, Confessions, he writes that the past and the future don't really exist except as forces that impact us in the present. He says, the past impacts the present because of our memories of it. The future impacts the present because of our expectations and anxieties about it. But as he puts it, he says, really the only thing that's real is the present. That's what we need to pay attention to. That these other things, they don't even exist. Well, it takes a little bit to wrap your head around there. I got to cogitate that one a little bit more. I'm not sure I agree with Augustine about that. I don't know that Paul agreed with Augustine about that either. I don't think Paul thought that deeply about, the past and the future. But Paul could rejoice in the present. He knew how to rejoice in the present because he saw God doing a good work in the stuff that had happened to him and even was happening to him, as he writes, even in the painful and unfair stuff that had happened to him. And because he deeply believed that the God who raised Jesus from the dead in the past could be trusted with his future. Well, Paul, I think we can read the passage and we see this in Paul, right? We see why it is that he's joyful. We can see that. But this kind of joy, I think, is often very elusive for us. Why is that? I wonder if it's not because these things that really were anchors for Paul's joy, the gospel being advanced, Christ being proclaimed, for me to live as Christ dies gain, that these things for us are more like ideas and theories that we think about, that we talk about, that we debate about, but they're not for us often, they don't feel like eternal realities in a way of life that's abundant and that's blessed. And a theory or an idea is not going to be nearly as important to you as your comfort and as your reputation. And so when something comes along that causes you discomfort, or somebody comes along and trashes your reputation, or like Paul, you find yourself in jail, a thought or a theory is not really enough to carry you in those things, is it? It's not. But friends, Jesus walked the earth as a real person like me and like you. And he performed miracles to show that what he taught was really valid, that had truth to it, and also to show that he was the unique Son of God and the Savior of the world. And he then died, what he said was a sacrificial death for sins, and then in real time and space history was raised from the dead to show that in him God had defeated sin and death. And it's these time and space facts that are the basis for the good news that because of who Jesus Christ is, because of what he has done, when we put our faith in him, which means we trust that these things of him are indeed true, and also we're seeking to live the kind of life that he calls people to live, well, then we come to have a real relationship with God, where despite our flaws and failures, we're his beloved sons and daughters. Friends, that's the gospel. And I know a whole lot of you here, you really do, you intellectually believe that, and you understand, yeah, that's really good, that's big, that's bigger than, if I'm healthy today, or if I'm in jail like Paul, or if my friends are trashing me. It's bigger than all that. And yet, what I really want to encourage us with is to kind of really get that from here to here. And that is to really do whatever it is that given your particular bent of heart and mind that you need to do to make these realities more viscerally and emotionally real in a way that can bring you joy when the circumstances of your life are not that good, and when your future is uncertain. Being in services like this is a big part of that, I think. Being a service that centers on this gospel. I think for a lot of us, music is something that really helps to drive these realities, from our heads to our hearts. I mean, if I had just stood up here a few minutes ago and said, Jesus Messiah, name above all names, blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, you'd be like, okay, that's nice, But there's something about when the band starts to melody that and we stand up together and we're singing that, right? That makes you think, yes, that's right. That's who Jesus is. That's who I worship. This has been really, really important. For me, maybe for you too, for a lot of us, there's something about being outside and just experiencing God's goodness and beauty in His creation, even in cold, wintry days. That really helps to make these realities come home for us. And something that I find, maybe you do too, is hanging around people who, because of their faith, are just joyful people. They just radiate joy. I was thinking, some of you know Bruce Smith is like this, right? Bruce comes to the early service. Alice, you know Bruce, yeah. He's really joyful. He tells really corny jokes. Even though he has a lot of challenges in his life. And there's something about being around people like that makes that kind of joy contagious for us. But here's the thing, friend. Whatever it is for you that is a particular kind of cocktail mix that keeps bringing you back to beholding and experiencing the goodness of God and the gospel, boy, just friend, drink that up. Drink it up. And I think for a lot of us too, this communion meal is something that does that for us. Because here, Jesus, in His wisdom, He gave us a way to remember Him, not just as a mental act, right? But to remember Him in a more real and visceral way that just engages all of our senses. To remember His incredible sacrifice, which on the one hand is a really sad and somber thing. But Scripture reminds us, Hebrews 12, it says this. It says that Jesus, for the joy set before Him, endured the cross, scorning its shame. And friends, if Jesus, in offering Himself in that way, in giving Himself that way, if that brought joy to Him, the giver, well, then certainly for us, the recipients of this incredible gift, maybe it can bring us some joy as well. Let's prepare to come to the table, shall we? Melissa, please join me at the table.